Good evening, treasure seekers. This is Blake coming to you live from New Mexico, and joining me, as always, from Washington State, it's Bryn and Cody. How's it going, guys?
Good evening. I have very mixed feelings on this episode. I will say uh, Cody is going to be giving away a lot, which
Oh, okay.
on one hand is a very
Just set the
exciting
bar high for
episode.
me.
It's a very exciting episode. However, I also feel like he's giving away a lot.
You really want that Charizard card, Bryn?
I just want to find a box.
Cody, you're feeling confident?
When I find something, I get too excited to share. I'm probably going to come off a little disjointed in this episode because I feel like most of this little, I'll call it a miniature breakthrough that I feel like is a good solve or a good partial solve. A lot of it I've literally been figuring out today. So I had my head buried in the computer up until right before we hit record, and I've just got notes strewn around. So I'm going to try and touch on some of this stuff, but you'll have to forgive me if I'm flipping through pages, looking all over the place to find my notes.
It'll be worth the listen.
All right. I'll be the first judge of that because I have not heard any of your solution yet, so excuse me.
Bless you.
All right. Anything we want to start with? So this is a special episode. This is going to be a part 2 box bonus episode. As we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast series, every 6th chapter that we finish in the main part 1 text of There's Treasure Inside, we're going to take a break and do one of the part 2 boxes. So 6 or 7 episodes ago, you would have seen the Forest Fen discussion that we had, the Forest Fen box discussion that we had, and today we're going to be doing the second part 2 box, which is the Pokemon box. I think I've heard a little bit about your Pokemon expertise, Cody, in previous episodes, so the bar is high. We'll see. We'll see what you're putting together here. I'm pumped for this.
Yeah, only Generation 1 expertise, but it's pretty similar in the newer generations. So I've got a little bit of background knowledge to work with. I know just enough about Pokemon and just enough about music to get me in trouble.
Okay, so it sounds like
he was trying to explain the solve to me, and I was like having to stop him on every Pokemon reference and just be like, so what does that one do? How does it evolve? I was Googling them to see what they look like.
Yeah. I'll try and remember that people have different background knowledges about Pokemon as we're explaining some of our stuff and talking about different Pokemon information.
Yeah, you're gonna have to help me out with some of these Pokemon because I didn't have a chance to look all of them up. So anyway, I think your cheat sheet should be useful from what I saw. So all right, do you want to just dive right in because it has potential to be a long episode potentially? All right, so
let's do it.
We're going to be covering chapter 25, and There's Treasure Inside by Jon Collins-Black, the Pokemon box. This chapter is a bit longer than some of the others that we've covered, so I'll try to do a recap here in a reasonable amount of time. The chapter starts out with Jon Collins-Black recollecting a family road trip that took place when he was 5.5 years old. It was a road trip with him and his parents and two of his grandparents. And they were departing from Statesville, North Carolina on a 2-week road trip. They had a camper van or a camper trailer that they were staying in during the course of this road trip. But we'll see they did stay at one hotel in New Orleans, which we'll get to shortly. It's a looping trip, so it wasn't there and back. It was a loop, so they were covering new ground every day. The first stop was not the first stop, but the first main city they were trying to get to in the road trip was New Orleans. I do have kind of a rough map of this journey from just a rough Google map, and be aware that the Ozarks, which is kind of their second destination, is pretty spread out. So I just did this very roughly, so don't hold my feet to the fire too much on this. But I just showing on the screen a Google map that I did with starting in Statesville, going to New Orleans, and then up to the Ozarks, and then back across Tennessee to Statesville. So this is just a guess. Yeah.
I think that the trip was to Houston.
Oh, it was to Houston. Uh-oh.
Yeah. So he went from Statesville, North Carolina, to New Orleans to Houston, then Ozarks back to Statesville.
You're absolutely right. Yes. So this is really a poor map. Let me stop sharing it as soon as possible. Okay. All right. Thank
One
you.
take only, not restarting.
No edits here. Okay. Anyway, that's a fairly long trip, and it's a looping trip. Like I said, they're visiting different locations. No repeats. The first stop is where we get the most detail about the road trip. It's about their stop in New Orleans. JCB had never been to a big city before, and so this was a special occasion, I would say, and he seemed to take full advantage of that and had a lot of excitement about it. They stayed in a 6-story hotel, which was a big deal because he had never seen a building that tall. The next day, they were planning on visiting the French Quarter. JCB mentions he was stunned by the automatic doors into the hotel. So that was the first time he had seen kind of those, I'm assuming like a slider door. He was enamored by the city and quickly outpaced his parents and grandparents on their way to the French Quarter. So they were walking over there. He got kind of ahead of his parents and grandparents and turned a corner and heard a saxophone playing and figured out that it was coming from this bar. Obviously, he didn't really have too much of a concept of what the bar was at 5.5 years old. So he just went right in, past the security, and sat right at the bar so he could listen to the music. He said, what an incredible world he had walked into, quote unquote, as if I had walked into Kirk's wardrobe or Alice's looking glass. His parents ended up tracking him down and finding him, and they moved on. JCB says that his road trip was full of formative memories, new landscapes every day, and a lot of interaction with nature. And so he recounts doing a lot of bug hunting and animal discovery, so turning over rocks to find salamanders and crawdads, chasing grasshoppers and fireflies and toads, and this was his first time witnessing an American eagle. At that point, this road trip story kind of ends, and he starts talking about Pokémon. Him and his now wife were visiting Portland, Maine, I believe, and they saw there was an inordinate amount of people outside and just walking around in the parks and in the park. Just too many people to be on a normal weeknight. And this was the first week of the release of the app Pokemon Go, which is one of the most popular apps that ever existed. There was a huge craze, and so that was our introduction to Pokemon through the Pokemon Go app, through this book at least. And then Jon Collins-Black says he relates to the creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, who was inspired by his collecting of insects as a child as well. And the creator of Pokemon is also known as Mr. Bug. And Satoshi Tajiri, he got the inspiration to develop the Pokemon game based on this fascination with collecting bugs. JCB talks a little bit about the treasures, the Pokemon treasures that are associated with this hunt, and he says at least one of these 2 Pokemon cards, which he shows in the first page of the chapter, the Shining Charizard from 2002 and a 1999 first edition Charizard, at least one of those cards are in the Pokemon box. Kind of strange that not both of them are in there. I don't know why you would call it the Pokemon box and not have both of them in there, but alas. He talks a little bit about the puzzle design, or sorry, the puzzle box design. So this box is designed after the Japanese puzzle boxes, which we had heard about in chapter 3, I believe, of the part 1 text. And then we get a little bit more detail about Japanese puzzle boxes in this chapter as well. And there's a quote from Seth Gould in this chapter that states a little bit more detail about the box he created. And this box was the most expensive that Jon Collins-Black commissioned, just because of the amount of labor that went into it from Seth Gould. This box has over 250,000 individual chisel cuts as part of the overlay technique. And that's a pretty modest estimation. It's probably quite a bit more. On the lid alone, there are 220 individual pieces of fine silver foil. So this is a super cool box. There's a great big image of it in the book. And Cody, let's get our hands on this one. All right. Thanks. He then goes into a new story about hiding the treasure. So actually hiding this treasure box. So a new kind of road trip-ish story. And he wanted to do this treasure box in a similar area that they passed in his road trip when he was a child, because of all the memories from that road trip that he has. And the quote is, not far from a place he visited on that trip. So anyway, that's a good hint that we know we're searching in this, Statesville to New Orleans to Houston to the Ozarks kind of loop. So that's, I would say, that and the Forest Fen box are probably ones that at least we have a rough geographic idea. Appalachian Trail, probably somewhere on the Appalachian Trail, but that's very long. I guess this road trip's very long too. But anyway, narrowing down the geography of, which boxes we know are probably where helps us with the other two, I would say, because they're likely not too close to each other. So yeah, about this trip where he is hiding the Pokemon box. They start at a jazz bar where he meets a Froakie, which is a Pokemon, like a frog type Pokemon, and convinces the Froakie to join him. And it's a convincing, it's not a capture like you would expect with the Pokemon games, let's say. He says he thought about taking the time to train the Froakie so that it could evolve into a Greninja. So Cody will hopefully inform us a bit more about Pokemon evolutions and things like that. But the time was short, and so he didn't end up doing that. He just kept the Froakie as is. The Froakie was riding on his backpack on a lily pad that Jon Collins-Black supposedly taped to his backpack. And they bought a jar of flies at the local pet store before leaving so that Froakie could have some snacks. And then when they're, I'm assuming, leaving the jazz bar or starting the road trip, they were listening to John Coltrane. And it says, it seemed appropriate, quote unquote. So I don't quite know what to make of that. I think Cody probably has some ideas if he's a music guy. Yay. When they arrived at their hiking spot, the weather was very hot. Froakie said it would be unlikely that they would encounter a fire type Pokemon, and that came up because I don't know, Jon Collins-Black was saying it's as hot as Charizard's breath, and Charizard is a fire type Pokemon. They heard a loud noise, and JCB thought it sounded like a Mabostiff, which I think is a dog type Pokemon. And Froakie says there's a no dogs allowed sign, so it probably wasn't that Pokemon. And then he says no Bouffalant either would be in this location. And I don't know what a Bouffalant is. I'm assuming it's a buffalo type Pokemon just based on how it's spelled. That seemed a little out of place to me.
It's based on a buffalo. I don't think that with the Mavistiff, I don't think there was a no dogs allowed sign. I think that's just one of the leading theories. I think he said that it just can't be there. And the theory, a lot of people theorize that because of the way he phrased that, he's alluding to the fact that it's in an area where there's no dogs allowed.
Okay. Okay.
The Froakie does point to a sign. But the Froakie pointing to a sign said that it was unlikely to.
Okay.
So I think we're just inferring that that's maybe like a no dogs allowed sign.
Okay.
Right.
I just remember not seeing the actual term no dogs allowed. So just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. Yes. Fact checks here.
Really roasting it.
He then sees Jon Collins-Black then sees what he thinks is a obstagoon, but it's actually just a raccoon, a regular raccoon, as the Froakie points out. And the raccoon climbs up a tree, a large oak about 7 feet up in the tree. Froakie sees some other Froakies and leaves Jon, and so Jon's now on his own. He says the path became increasingly shaded. He spotted some Cricketoon, Yanma, and 2 Ledib, or Heracross, and Ninjastic were everywhere, and 1 Pheromosa. So that was the most unintelligible part of the podcast, hopefully, today. But that's a bunch of Pokemon, I'm assuming. And then he says the path became further hemmed in, and Jon Collins-Black was worried about getting lost at that point. So he stopped for a drink on a rock and saw a Magikarp and a Swampert. So those are like fish or water type Pokemon. So we're assuming the rock he stopped on is near like a stream or a lake. The Froakie then came back, and in tow he had a Elder Greninja, which Greninja again is the evolved version of a Froakie. So there's now 2 Pokemon with Jon. And then Jon Collins-Black opens the treasure box and shows them the Fabergé frog, which is also pictured in the chapter. A green Fabergé frog with red eyes. And then he pulls out the Pokemon card, and they are impressed by that as well. Greninja knew the area well, and they reversed course. He saw some minnows, Magikarp, and Magikarp talking to a Sea King at that point. Again, another Pokemon. And then the Greninja introduces Jon to a wise Golem, who had a good idea where to hide the treasure, and they circled back. They left the treasure not far from where, quote-unquote, locals turn up from time to time. And then it's about time to leave because it's becoming evening. Jon bowed to the Froakie and left the jar of flies with it. He shook hands with the Greninja and the Golem. And then he talks a little bit about the pictures he took. He said he took a bunch of pictures while he was on this journey, but there's only one that was actually not too overexposed, and that's the picture that he shows in the book here as the last page. It's one picture that he said he didn't remember taking, and that was potentially due to taking pictures in an expanded reality. End scene. All right. Did I cover all the high points there?
You did. Great recap.
That's good.
All right.
So Cody, do you want to give us an overview of how we're gonna tackle this?
Don't tackle the episode.
Yeah.
There's 2 more kind of overarching things after this overview here that I want to touch on real quick. One of them is hopefully should be a very quick conversation on the limits of the search area. This one seems pretty well defined. And then we're going to reference a spreadsheet I put together real quick, and I can walk you through that. And that spreadsheet has each of the Pokemon that were mentioned in kind of the latter half of this chapter in his what he's calling his expanded reality trip. I've listed all of those out and a bunch of different data for them. So we can walk through that real quick and get some background information on each of these Pokemon. I'll need some help from you guys on kind of what to touch on, because I've just known about Pokemon since I was like 5. So like it would never have occurred to me to bring up like to reference like how evolutions work, because that's just background knowledge for me. So
No worries.
if you guys
No
can help
worries.
me identify some of that stuff,
Okay.
I can walk through some of that stuff, especially when we're looking at the data spreadsheet. And then what I'd like to do is I felt like we did a really good job staying kind of linear and focused in the last part 2 box that we did for the Forest Fen one. And a lot of that happened naturally because it was a poem and we could kind of take it stanza by stanza. So I'd like to do kind of a similar thing with this chapter. But since it's not a poem, I'd like to break it up into, I've got 5 different kind of sections of the chapter and kind of 5 different topics that he touches on. And we can kind of take a deeper dive into each of those 5 sections. That'll hopefully keep us going linearly and keep me with my bunch of pages of notes scattered on my desk here from kind of just going off on too many crazy tangents.
All right. Seems
Perfect.
reasonable to me.
Sounds good. Agenda approved.
Agenda approved. Limits
Excellent.
of the search area.
Yes, including Houston.
Including Houston. Sorry, everyone.
So okay.
So yeah, we've had a couple of conversations about things that Jon Collins-Black has said, whether we're taking him with a grain of salt or taking his word for it. I think of all the things he'd said, I think this one, I'd hope you guys agree, is something we can just trust, and that is that he took his road trip from North Carolina to New Orleans, Houston, Ozarks, back to North Carolina, and then in the text of the chapter, he says, "Because of all the precious memories I had of my road trip to Houston, I decided it would be fitting to leave a treasure box not far from some place I had visited along that journey." So a little bit of interpretation there with the not far from. I guess my take on that would be that the box could be hidden anywhere, south of, including in south of the Ozarks, including in north of basically the ocean down there in Louisiana, west of North Carolina, east of Houston, and maybe like 100 mile buffer around that would be probably my search area that I'd be looking. And I wouldn't really rule out anything inside of that circular road trip, just because my thoughts are this would have happened before like Google Maps. So who knows what route they were taking, and B, it's a road trip, right? So you're not always just taking the fastest route. So he never really says how he got from place to place. So that's my thoughts on the limits. I have to imagine you guys more or less agree with me.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that checks out.
Agreed.
Excellent. Unanimous. So
Yep.
if it's outside of that area, all 3 of us are going to be very, very angry.
Embarrassing.
All right. I figured that part would go quick. I was hoping no one would argue with me there.
No.
So Blake, if you want to pull up the spreadsheet, we can start looking at that and get into the sweet, sweet data.
All right. Spreadsheet is up.
Excellent. So you were asking for confirmation of what was and what wasn't a Pokemon name.
Yes.
So over in the left-hand most column, those are all of the Pokemon. And for this spreadsheet, you'll see in the 4th column, it says order in, there's treasure inside text. And that's in order right now. So everything in the left-hand most column, those are the names of the Pokemon as mentioned in the text in order. So when it's first mentioned, it got added to the list. So the first one we're introduced to is Froakie. Then we see all of those other Pokemon. And then the last one we see is Golem, who I believe was like the one who helps us actually find the final hiding spot at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I included, I haven't got anything out of this, but the second column is the Japanese name. I didn't know if it would happen to like spell something out or anything. Don't ask me to pronounce any of those. It's not going to happen. Next column is Pokedex number. Some background information on this. Basically, every Pokemon, I should actually back up real quick. So the whole like Pokemon brand in general is pretty good about like what's canon and what's not canon and having data. And it's like, this is accurate and you're not going to find a lot of like discrepancies in anything formal. They kind of, it is what it is and they stick to it. So all of this information found in the spreadsheet is pretty much is what it is, which is nice for this kind of stuff when you're trying to like potentially use this information to track down a treasure box. I know there's a lot of other games and things similar to Pokemon where, there might be more discrepancies and, different people involved might be adding different things, and they're kind of more loose about the canon and the lore. Pokemon's not like that. So the Pokedex number is the number basically associated with each Pokemon. It starts with 1, and the first generation of Pokemon, which are like the first group that was released, was 1 through 151, with 150, I believe, I should know this, but 150, I believe, was Mewtwo, and 151 was Mew, I think.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay. And then I don't even, like I said, I'm a generation 1 guy, so I'm not even sure what generation they're on now. It's like 8, 9, 10, something like that. And the Pokemon numbers then get really high. So like Froakie's a 600 numbered Pokemon. So he's actually, I think I have a column here for generation. He's generation 6. Looks like our highest one is that Obstagoon at generation 8. Anyway, Pokedex number could be useful for something. Obviously, we love numbers, and because numbers are hard data, right?
Right.
Already covered the order in there's treasure inside text. So the next column is during his augmented reality trip, he either says that he saw this Pokemon or says, in a couple of cases, no, it definitely wouldn't be there, like we were mentioning with the Charizard and the Buffalont. So I mentioned that in there. Most of them are yes, because it's something he saw along his trip. Then there's the unknown on the Obstagoon, because they ended up being raccoons. So he thought he saw them, so maybe they should have been there, or it wouldn't be unreasonable to see them there. Couple of probablys, like the Lediba and the Heracross, he thought it was one or the other. So again, it's probably there, but not for sure. I think that could be useful because it seems like a lot of people are taking the approach of taking what each of those Pokemon represents on like a real creature, which is the column we're about to talk about, and saying, kind of trying to narrow down areas where all of the creatures that he said he found on this trip are located in real life. And I think that's kind of the obvious first stab most people would take when they're trying to kind of narrow down where to look for this treasure. Next column is the formal category, which is, I don't like it, but it's like it's a categorization that Pokemon has actually done formally. So that's what it actually is. And it's, to me, there's just too many different formal categories. It's like, why even categorize it if there's only a handful that go in each category and there's just a million different categories? But that information is there for your viewing pleasure. I don't like that column. Next one's the based on creature, which is basically what we were just talking about. So Froakie, based on a frog. A lot of these are not official Pokemon canon data kind of stuff, but more of like, I think like a lot of it's kind of user generated Wikipedia or wiki entry type things. So most of them are like, you can be like 90 to 99% certain on a lot of them. But there is that little grain of salt on that column. The next column is what type the Pokemon is. There's a handful of different types that Pokemon can be. This will obviously be important if you're taking the approach of seeing what Pokemon were on his augmented reality trip or viewed during his augmented reality trip, and saying that that's where you're going to start looking. So there's a lot of, obviously the main character or main Pokemon with him was the Froakie, who's a water type Pokemon. So you'd expect water. And then there's also a lot of bug type Pokemon. So kind of what you'd expect when he's talking about some kind of swampier areas, a lot of water, a lot of bug. And then towards the end, you get Golem, who really stands out as different than kind of the water and bug trend. Right at the end, you get this rock or ground Pokemon. And you can look up some more information on Golem. I think that, I think he kind of stands out as significant to be like the last Pokemon you see on the journey. because he's just pretty different from the other ones. So I'd recommend doing a little bit of background reading on him. And then each Pokemon has strengths and weaknesses. So I listed their weaknesses there. Those are abbreviations. We probably won't get too into detail on that right now. And I also listed every Pokemon has base stats for a number of different things like hit points, attack, defense, special hit point, or special attack, special defense. So I listed each Pokemon's highest base stat, and lowest base stat. Nothing stood out to me too much there. It seemed pretty jumbled. At first, when I saw kind of the list of Pokemon, I had a very, very loose initial theory that it seemed like there was a lot of speed-based Pokemon, but that didn't really pan out. I think that's more just because it's a lot of small bug and water Pokemon, so they have higher speed stats, but it didn't kind of carry through everything there. So that theory I abandoned pretty quickly. So then the next three columns here are the evolutions. So Pokemon, basically each Pokemon, well, not every Pokemon, some Pokemon, as they level up or through other means, become kind of the next version of that Pokemon along like I don't even know what the term would be, basically a chain that's normally 2 or 3 evolutions long. So just like, for example, Froakie would be kind of the base Pokemon, kind of the first stage 1 Pokemon. Then as he levels up, and it's most of the time this happens through leveling up in the game. Sometimes it's the use of like an item or some other special situation that makes a Pokemon level up, but most of the time, or makes a Pokemon evolve, but most of the time it's leveling up. So Froakie levels up, becomes Frogadier, which is he's going to be similar to Froakie, but it's almost like he grew up. And then in the case of Froakie and Frogadier, there's then a third evolution where the Frogadier would turn into Greninja, which is like growing up again or becoming better in some ways. I'm realizing it's kind of hard to describe. Evolution is just something I've known since I was a child, but for some reason it's so hard to describe. But yeah, that's the gist of it. Is for a lot of these Pokemon, they can turn into an associated but almost like grown up version of that Pokemon. And it has a different name, different stats, different everything, but it's kind of along that evolutionary chain. And then some of them can't at all. Like you'll see Buffalint there is kind of he is what he is. Buffalint doesn't turn into a different Pokemon, at least not through any kind of normal standard evolution cycle. Fun fact, you can also keep your Pokemon from evolving by holding down the B button as they're trying to evolve in the video game, if you don't want them to turn into the next one. If you like your Froakie and don't want it to become a Frogadier.
Okay.
With the Froakie, it was interesting because he talks a ton about Froakie, talks a ton about Greninja, but then nothing about Frogadier, who's like would be the in-between evolution. Like you can't go from a Froakie directly to a Greninja. So kind of an interesting tidbit there. And then this is getting kind of long-winded. So catch rate, just a stat. It's just a stat. Base experience yield, just a stat. Both of those I included just because I like numbers and seeing if something lines up. Did seem like there was a lot of 45s for catch rate. I looked at kind of generally the chances of the Pokemon having 45 catch rate, and it seemed a lot lower than the data I'm getting here. It seems like we got like over 50% of them at 45. So that might be something worth looking into. Then generation, that is the different kind of groups of Pokemon that were released. So like I said, I'm the Generation 1 guy, the first 151 Pokemon. You'll see that there's 4 Generation 1 Pokemon that were mentioned, the Golem, Seaking, Magikarp, and Charizard, and then a bunch of other generations. And then egg group is, don't even really want to get into that. Nothing really seemed applicable from that, but you can also hatch and breed Pokemon, and they have certain types of eggs that are associated with each of them, but I don't think that's going to be applicable here. All right. That's the data on the Pokemon from the augmented reality portion of the chapter.
Right.
Questions?
That's a lot
I
of
mean,
data.
I appreciate that you researched the Pokemon on my behalf, so I did not have to look them all up. That was very, very welcomed.
Yeah, not a ton of takeaways from that, but I think that if you're going to take the Pokemon chapter seriously, that's information you want to have available to you. And I haven't found anywhere else where it's compiled. So take a screenshot of that. I saved you an hour and then talked about it for an hour.
All right.
All right.
Excellent. That's
Through
good.
the
Good.
data section.
Good background. So we did the limits of the search area and a real crash course in data about the Pokemon that are mentioned in this chapter. But I think that's all good background and helpful. So thanks, Cody, for that.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough listen, but it's I think it's like I said, I think there's high probability that it ends up becoming important. So it's good to cover I'd say real quick, but good to cover.
All right. Should we dive into the chapter sections? We'll start with the road trip memory. So this is the original road trip that Jon Collins-Black took when he was 5.5 years old and went on a road trip with his parents and grandparents. So who wants to start with some, let's say, nuggets from this portion of the chapter? We're in.
I'm happy to go.
All right.
I mean, I feel like there's so many things that stand out, but what I wrote down, let me actually get to my notes. The thing that stood out as most curious to me in this section was referencing adults moving slowly on 2 different occasions. So he talked about the adults getting adults slow to get ready in the hotel, and then that the adults were eating slowly as he was like trying to get out and explore the city. So it seemed weird that he would reference this twice right in a row. I can't quite pinpoint why, but I think that will become important as we reveal a solve.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking that just showed the childlike eagerness of Jon Collins-Black getting to the big city. But maybe you have more on that one coming up. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't heard your guys' solve yet. So.
I guess I just felt like I understood that maybe that was the intention, but it still felt out of place, even if that was like the underlying intent.
All right. I was interested in the very specific use of proper nouns in the first paragraph. So he mentioned they crammed our hard case Samsonite luggage. They attached the J-Co pop-up. So I don't know if there's something hidden within the use of all those proper nouns, or if he's just trying to paint a picture, like very specifically, that basically lets us see in our mind exactly what's happening during loading of this road trip. But I don't know. I don't think he's gone into detail in other parts of the book as much as he did with this particular one. So not quite sure what to make of that. Just caught my eye.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was an attempt to kind of like paint the time period of his childhood, but at the same time, like, why would the hard case Samsonite luggage be like restricted to his childhood? Like, that's still a thing. I don't think it's necessarily tied to that decade or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know. I kept going back and forth on that, and if it was just kind of his storytelling approach, trying to kind of paint a picture of this road trip and some distinct memories he had, or if it is going to be a hint.
And then 5.5 also, the age specifically. I mean, if I said I was 5 in a book, then maybe people would question whether or not I remember anything from that time period. So he's maybe just trying to say he was like 5.5, a little bit older than 5, so that this is a little bit more believable. Just personally cannot remember memories like this at that young of age. I think everybody's a little different on that, but anyway, I wasn't quite sure why 5.5 was mentioned, if that's important or not.
I flagged that because it says I was 5 and half.
Oh yeah, so it's a typo. Is that a typo in your book too, Cody? You can let us know later. I don't want to put you on the
I don't
spot.
have that one.
Oh, okay. Right.
No, I
Yeah,
just got
and I don't.
part one.
It certainly could just be a typo, but I don't know if it's also just trying to draw attention to something else as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had the same thought on the Samsonite, and we've talked, about the. I don't think you remember as a 5.5-year-old what kind of luggage you had, or what kind of camper it was, or that you're interested in brands that much in general, other than maybe Hot Wheels. But we've talked about that in previous episode, and he said, he's going to tell a story, right? So he might be, like Bryn said, he might be including some of those to kind of give a feel for the era when this was happening. Let's see here. I wrote down here, he used the phrase that he brimmed to the rim.
Yeah, I wrote
that stood
that down
out as
well.
A strange phrase to me, brimmed to the rim. And I remember looking it up, finding some references to an old coffee called Brim Coffee, that used a slogan similar to brim to the rim.
Okay.
But yeah, strange phrase. It's kind of like what was the one you had looked up the other day or the few episodes ago?
Bend a phrase.
Bend a phrase, similar to that, where I was putting things in quotes and still not getting a whole lot of results. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting choice of words there. I got a handful of others here too, but I'll let you guys, if you guys have more, let's kind of go in a circle here.
I'm hesitant to say this one because my hand theme was not so well received in the Jackie Onassis chapter.
Oh, yeah. I thought the hand theme here was strong.
Thank you.
Okay.
Here?
Like in this chapter.
Hand theme in this chapter?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you didn't catch hand theme.
You didn't even find your own theme.
No, I wrote down 5 theme.
Okay, so 5 certainly
There's a lot of references to 5.
Really? Okay.
I've seen some speculation on Discord about, I think his sister is a couple years, I want to say, younger than him. And why was she never mentioned? And you'd think she'd be on this road trip if he's there and the grandparents are there.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw some speculation on the Discord that she may have just purposely been omitted to keep the number at 5.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, hand theme will come back in a little bit, Bryn.
I have some hand theme as well.
No way. Okay.
Way to whiff on your signature theme.
My signature theme is transcending circumstances. I don't know if I thought
I don't
want to
be tied to hand theme.
Okay, Cody, why don't you ring some off? I'm out for this one, so.
Oh, okay. 6-story hotel. I remember early days of Discord, people trying to kind of track down, hey, a 6-story hotel would be kind of notable in this era. So can we actually locate, one or a handful of hotels that this could have been, and would that help us in any way? So that stood out. I'm gonna skip a couple because I'm gonna touch on them later on when I do my half solve that I've got.
Okay.
He said at one point, and I didn't write down enough of this quote, but he used the phrase "grand, amazing delight," which just seemed like another one of those kind of interesting way to phrase things. And then he also talks about, he calls it the magical road trip, and says he saw salamanders, crawdads, grasshoppers, fireflies, toads, eagle. That's obviously, to me, like setting up his magical road trip as a kid, then as an adult becomes the augmented reality road trip, where you get a lot of those kind of similar creatures in Pokemon form.
Right.
How that helps us, I'm not sure, but it does seem like it's kind of like mirror imaged from that part of the chapter to the last part of the chapter when he's doing this augmented reality trip.
This may be a dumb question, but he says that he witnessed his first American eagle. I guess I don't know what to make of that. Is that like truly a type of eagle, an American eagle?
I'm pretty sure that's just product placement for the store. Probably getting
just like Samsonite.
Yeah.
Got all the sponsorships. Yeah, I don't.
The ebook's actually just all affiliate links.
I should have written that down because I actually looked into it, and I don't think that American Eagle is a real species name. Let's say, I think it's a
So
bald eagle is what comes up when you search for
yeah.
American Eagle after the store. Yep.
I mean, it maybe we'll kind of get into like the Japan connection again, but is there like a Japanese eagle that we're supposed to be comparing and contrasting that to? I guess, yeah, calling this out specifically as an American eagle just seemed a little out of place.
And maybe it wasn't a bald eagle. Maybe it was a different type of eagle. Maybe he had not seen an eagle before, but I agree that that's a little suspicious why that wording was used. I don't know the geographical regions of bald eagle distribution in the US though, so I can look that
Can you
up.
map that out real quick, please?
I don't know, maybe.
They're definitely not in Houston.
Come on.
All right. Was that all of our first section of the chapter notes?
Yeah, that is for me.
Yeah. That's all I've got on that section, yeah.
All right.
I will say I see a Japanese golden eagle, for what that's worth.
Okay. Bald eagles are found in many parts of the United States, including Alaska, the Rocky Mountains, the Mississippi River, and the coasts. So,
Mississippi River.
Yeah.
That's the area.
That's for bald eagles, though. I don't know about other eagles, so maybe worth diving into a little bit more.
We'll have an eagle special episode.
I hope not, but... Okay, sorry. Back to the agenda. The release of the Pokemon Go and the Pokemon history. I'll just go first because I don't have much in terms of nuggets in this section. Obviously, there's just a lot of numbers that are associated with this section, and the numbers are the number of downloads, which I mentioned was 280 million in the first week. Episodes being broadcast in 183 countries. This is only one of 252 such gem mint cards for the, I think that's for the Shining Charizard. That's included in one of the treasures. And 715 exist with a 9 quality rating of the Charizard holographic original edition 1 Pokemon card. And there's other examples of numbers in here too. It's just a really number heavy couple of pages, I would say. So I don't know if you guys have come up with a way to use those numbers yet, but that was really my only takeaway, major takeaway from this section.
With the numbers, I would add, there also continues to be a discrepancy between his use of numerals versus spelled out numbers as well.
Yeah. I saw the same thing with all the numbers. Yeah, like you said, you flip to the page before you even read anything. You can just tell that it's very number dense. I also mentioned or wrote down the, he wrote, talking about Pokemon, he says all the colors, shapes, sizes, and rarity. I thought that was kind of interesting for him to list those things out specifically, especially since something like colors isn't really something. I mean, yeah, color, shape, sizes, rarity. I don't know. It seemed like strange. If you're going to talk about Pokemon, it seems like strange choices of things to just use to describe them. So maybe there's something more there. Maybe there's a reason he's specifically calling out Pokemon's colors, shapes, sizes, and rarity. Yeah, that stood out to me. If I was going to kind of describe a group of Pokemon, those probably wouldn't be the things I'd pick.
Right.
I do think to make an argument for color, when I think of Pokemon cards and how they can be categorized, I don't know the term for this, but like the color of the card really groups them into their family. So whether that be like the water or the fire Pokemon. So kind of thinking through color at a higher level than the color of the Pokemon itself.
I think this was in reference to Pokemon Go. So it'd be like the on your phone Pokemon. I don't know. I'm probably reading into that one a little bit too much, but
Did either one of you ever play Pokemon Go?
I did
No.
briefly, maybe for like 3 days. So I'm familiar with like how it works
Yeah, so you can like
roughly.
picture the interface and stuff.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, that's good for context in case anything stood out from that. Um, for me, when he was talking about like where all these hordes of people were and their locations, they were around fountains, on the sidewalks. The one that stood out to me was a quote, "No storefront awnings were left unoccupied."
Hmm.
That seems odd. I guess it does give you a nice visual of like a busy street, but storefront awnings felt oddly specific. I don't know if that will help paint a picture for us as, you kind of dial in a specific location. That being said, I can't imagine this treasure is hidden in like a busy spot like that, but maybe it's pointing us in the right direction.
Yeah, I totally skimmed over that one. That's a good point. That's kind of a strange choice of description. I got another one here. It's describing the creator of Pokemon and saying they called him Mr. Bug.
Mm-hmm.
I saw some chatter recently about that on the Discord, and haven't had a chance to look into it much, but it sounded like maybe they called him like Dr. Bug, and that might have been a typo, or and then people were arguing that no, it is Mr. Bug, and then there's another Mr. Bug, some Mr. Bug literary or TV references. I haven't gone down that path yet, but I saw that it stood out to me, and then I saw that people were discussing that already.
Okay, good. Any other parts that you want to highlight for this section of the chapter? Nope.
Not for me.
No, I don't think so. I think that section seemed pretty straightforward, and like he wanted to just give a genuine description of Pokemon and kind of fill people in on why they should be interested.
Right. The Seth Gould puzzle box. I don't really have any takeaways from this, I won't lie. Other than
I can.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Other than it's a really cool box and we should get it.
I'll jump in here. I'm going to embarrass myself as I try to pronounce things. So I thought it was really interesting that he compared the Seth Gould box to a traditional Japan puzzle box. And I think the thing that stands out most as kind of a unifying feature between the two is the patterns used. And so I did a little bit of research on like what these different patterns are, how they're used in the traditional puzzle boxes, and then maybe what he has applied intentionally to the patterns that he has selected to use on the box, the Seth Gould box. So I found the patterns. They all seem to be kind of like a slightly different take, but three distinct patterns that I think we can identify. So the first one, okay. I, I just feel bad because I'm going to butcher these. Ashonana. So that's like the star pattern that you see. If you're looking at the picture of the box on page 215, it's on like the front face in the upper right-hand corner. It's the smallest pattern where there's kind of like a bunch of liney stars. So that pattern traditionally means, like indicates children's health and growth. So I didn't know, I mean, we kind of had this like generational theme. We have the children's books. He was a child when he went on this road trip. So it just seemed appropriate that like the child theme would be tied in here. The next one was Kikoku. And that is the name of this, like the hexagons, I guess you would see also on that same face of the box, but in a much larger volume or much larger area of that surface. And that is symbolic of like tortoise longevity and a long life prayer. So tortoise stood out to me. Sorry, Cody, I can't remember if any of your Pokemon were tortoise related. The only thing that comes to mind was Squirtle, which
Gollum can be tortoise related. It's probably one of the weaker affiliations between a real life creature and a Pokemon, but Gollum and tortoise there is people have that take.
Yeah, certainly the Golem has a tortoise-like shell, and it goes into its shell from the pictures that I saw online. So that is a good connection. I like that.
Cool. Well, that seems
Connections,
appropriate then.
yeah, connections to Gollum are welcome because he was there. That Gollum was there when the treasure was hidden.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I like that more. Whenever you talk about Gollum, I think of like the strong rock dude, which is not that.
Geodude.
I think of Geodude. Sorry. Excuse my ignorance. Okay, and then on the top of the box, that pattern's called maybe Shippo. So that's kind of like those diamonds that you see in the circles. Oh gosh, I did not edit this note. It's kind of long. I'll just read it. Shippo is actually the 7 patterning treasures in Buddhism. Is a shape overlapped by several circles and is also commonly used in Japanese patterns. So the overlapping circles stand for the meaning of happy ending, which felt very appropriate in finding a treasure. And also kind of, I won't get into Cody's solve, but this overlapping circles, this pattern also feels like it could tie into some of what Cody found as well. So I think that covers all the patterns that you can see on the box.
And that pattern is also the one that's on the commemorative coin. Is that last pattern that you just mentioned?
So at surface level, I would say that all 3 of those patterns do tie in. It feels like they could have definitely been intentional. Whether or not those necessarily become clues, I don't know, or if it's just kind of a nice touch on wanting to bring the Japanese culture into it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of thoughts when I saw the Seth Gould box because, like you, I saw it and thought, "Hey, there's a lot going on here. I wonder if there's something of interest that we should dig into more." I was turned off by it pretty immediately because of Jon Collins-Black's hard stance on that he's the only one who knows anything about the clues. So I don't think I thought, hey, he probably isn't going to like want Seth Gould to have any even small little tidbits of knowledge where people are going to mess with him and try and get information out of him. I mean, I can see a world where, he told Seth Gould, hey, I need these patterns on the box. And in his own mind said, hey, that doesn't count as Seth Gould being in the know about it. So I don't want to completely like discredit your theory. I think it's doable, but was my first thought on it was that JCB wouldn't want to get other people involved to that level.
Yeah, and I think since they are more of just like the traditional patterns, kind of reimagined, maybe. I don't think that would have given anything away for him to give some artistic direction on patterns he wanted included.
Yeah,
but
I agree with you.
Maybe there's nothing more to it.
No, I think you got a really good take there, and I'm glad you dug into that a little bit more. There's some good potential in some of those links.
Yeah, I agree. I like that a lot.
If people want a little bit more information on the puzzle boxes, I think we covered those quite a bit in our chapter 3 recap.
Right.
About the Fabergé items. So click over there when you're done on this episode if you haven't seen it yet. A little bit more information.
You better believe I hopped on Seth Gould's Instagram to check out his caption for this box and any of the comments people left, but I didn't find anything super helpful. So nothing to report there. You don't need to take the time to do that.
Right.
The takeaway I got from this section of the chapter was in his quote from Seth Gould, where he's quoted saying, this took 250,000 cuts, but that could be a low estimate. It could have been many more than that.
Mhm.
To me, it seems like that was an ample opportunity to insert the number 250,000 if he needed that number as part of a clue.
Yeah.
Because it just seems strange to say that and then say, oh, but I could be way off. He basically could have
But
picked any number.
that's also a Seth Gould quote. So he
Right.
would
It
have had
is.
to instruct him to say, can you say more than 250,000, which feels a lot more revealing than, can you use these patterns, please?
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay. I agree
Nice.
with
I win
you.
this round.
Just a next
Yeah.
section, please.
So yeah, let me just say one more thing about this. At this point in the chapters where he kind of gives the best description of Pokemon, where I feel like it should have been much earlier with the short paragraph about if you played the Pokemon video game, it's fairly simple. It's fairly simple. The game is a hunt, and the Pokemon characters are the treasure. Players act to find a Pokemon, capture it, and then train the Pokemon to grow and evolve it into a stronger and more capable form of itself. Once a Pokemon is caught, it assists the player in capturing even more powerful and elusive Pokemon. Why wasn't that earlier in like the Pokemon section instead of this puzzle box section? That seemed like the most succinct explanation that a layman would understand, right?
I read that probably like 5 times trying to understand its context here. And I was trying to convince myself that maybe it only seems out of context because it's physically on the page with the puzzle box other information. But I still think even if you were to like, stick it on the top of the next page and it lives there, it still feels weird in that location. And I agree that it's like, this would belong, like you're saying, earlier on in the understanding of Pokemon.
Before he starts talking about Pokemon Go, or before he starts talking about the Game Boy game, or before he starts talking about the cards. Like, if you're coming into this not knowing anything about Pokemon, this would be a very frustrating 2 pages to read before that.
Right.
Yeah. That could also, again, we could chalk that up to him doing, I think him and one other person really doing all the editing on the book, right? So
Right.
But even if
it could be some of that too.
Even if you're just like initially writing it out that way, like why would that be your stream of thought though?
And it could be how the words fit on the page. I don't know. Just formatted to make it look more pretty, because there's a lot of pictures in the puzzle box section, right? It's got the coin, it's got a Japanese puzzle box example, and it's got the full treasure box, which takes up a full page. So I don't know.
Well, as someone who would not have touched on Pokemon evolutions unless someone brought it to my attention, there's also, he probably did a pretty deep dive into Pokemon for a long time. And I think you lose track of what you need to explain to people once it kind of becomes your own background knowledge.
I don't know. I'm not letting him off on that one. I think it's weird and intentional. I mean, it's a book. You would revisit that and be like, oh, well, this just fundamentally belongs more in an introductory section of the chapter.
Yeah. Especially how it relates to treasure. Like, that's the first time he's said, Pokemon is like a treasure hunt itself. Like, you should actually just lead the chapter with that, or at least after the road trip. I don't know.
Yeah, right. That's
Next
a good
section.
point.
Augmented reality trip. So I think this will be the deep dive, probably.
I think this is the meat of the chapter, yeah.
Okay. This is the part where he is now talking about present day and going to hide his Pokemon treasure box somewhere near the route that he took as a child for his historical road trip. Who wants to start? Rin?
Yeah. So he ends towards the end of the story. He talks about, well, here's the quote. I start the walk back towards where we'd begun our day. Which hand theme. No. So we ran into the same thing with the Forest Fen box. He in the Forest Fen poem, he says, now I must return to my car or my ride, whatever. And here he's also saying, I must return to where we'd begun the day. Why, I mean, why in both of these instances is he calling out, okay, I'm now returning to where I started? I think that's going to be important. I guess we have enough context with passive feature box that doesn't necessarily tie through with that theme, but it just seems weird that in both of these instances he talks about like doubling back on his trail to get back to where he started.
So does that indicate in your mind that it's an out and back trail? It's not a loop trail?
I've been very stuck on it ever since we talked about it in the Forest Fen box. I think when we talked about it there, I've been trying to figure out in my head if there's any. So in that one, he said, I have other treasures to hide. That was kind of like his urgency to return. So in my mind, I was trying to make that into like, well, is this trying to indicate a time of year? Is he saying he's doing this in the fall and he's trying to do it before it snows? This obviously doesn't make as much sense because he's not saying like for what reason he's needing to get back. He's just going back. So yeah, I don't know if it is just like an out and back trail versus a loop. Yeah, I guess transparently, I just don't know what to make of it, but it seemed curious that both of these part 2 boxes ended in that way.
Yeah, I think it's getting dark out is the reason. I wouldn't say there's no reason, but yeah, it's curious that becomes a point of emphasis that, yeah, of course you have to return, but why do you say it? I guess it's just wrapping up in my mind if I'm being a JCB defender, but no, I think it is strange to have it in both cases. I think, yeah, that's all I'll say for that. I'll try one of mine first. I was looking at the Fabergé frog, and it says, and I actually lost the quote. It says something about its piercing red eyes. So it's a green frog with piercing red eyes, and so that got me thinking that, I don't know, that there's some board games and things like that use those red gels, those red filters. And because the picture in the Pokemon chapter of the overexposed image, like it looked like that maybe could have a link. So I got out my trusty red filter here and looked at the image and did not come up with anything. So in case somebody else wants to try that, they're welcome to. I was hoping it would, like, I don't know, make a certain part of this picture clear, because there's like, it's mostly purple, and I know we're probably not in the picture section yet, but it was the frog that led me down that path because of the red eyes. So if you want to look through red eyes, see something through a red lens, maybe that reveals something. I didn't have any luck with that revealing anything beyond what's already in the pictures.
That's funny you tried that. That actually came to mind as like, when I looked at this, I kind of thought of the game, not catchphrase, Outburst.
Yes.
Where you have to put it in the red filter to see the words behind it.
Exactly. That was my thought process as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you tried it. Thank you. Cody, do you want us to wrap ours up before we let you take a little bit more of a deep dive?
Yeah, and I've still got more too, and then we'll talk about the photos.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, go for it.
Let's see. A couple of obvious ones. The Army of Croakers, strange phrase. Saw a couple things on Discord about that back a couple weeks ago. I haven't verified any of them. Just seems like a strange phrase. Just call them frogs.
Because that's not even referring to the Pokemon. That's just referring to frogs. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. There's the Croakers. Croaker is not a Pokemon.
I guess I would say with that is probably trying to draw attention to like the sound, because music is going to really come into play here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Would be my initial guess for what that would be. Like, rather than just looking at the frog as a species, let's take a look at the sound that these. Can you add a column to your chart and say sounds that these animals make noise?
Yes, I'll just put in audio recordings of me making the sounds.
We can have Blake, since he's our resident
Just send it to
Would you,
Rashawn, please.
Peter, yeah, Rashawn, can you please make sounds for all of the Pokemon?
Oh my gosh.
All right. Hand
See here.
theme. Hand theme. Ready?
And oh, you got a nugget?
Yeah. Sorry,
All
were
right,
you
let's
done
hear
with
it.
yours? Or do you want
Oh,
to you want to talk
I've got
about
like 6 more.
Kroger's more.
I'm done with Croakers. I've got a handful more things to touch on for this section, though.
Okay. When he's talking about the Fabergé egg, he pulls it out and describes it and shows it to him, and then it says the Froakie and Greninja clapped feverishly in response. It's impressive how well you do that, I acknowledged, I being Jon Collins-Black. They winked at me knowingly.
Yes.
What does that
Huge
mean?
one.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
I mean, the Froakie and the Greninja have kind of like webbed hands, so it makes sense that they could clap. But why would he compliment them on their ability to clap? And why did they wink at him knowingly? That is crazy to me. So it's got to mean, I mean, it has to mean something. Okay.
That's one of those ones where when this is all said and done and he's explaining the correct answer, there's just no way that's not part of it.
That is on Cody's short list behind page number 90 missing. The clapping feverishly is for sure a clue, and page 90 is for sure a clue.
It's even more than that. It's the winked at me knowingly.
Yeah.
That's the part that I was like, what?
So you guys, you don't have an answer for that, Cody?
No, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
But I was talking to Brandon when we were going through, as I was developing this partial solve, and I was saying, with what I've got from my partial solve that we'll cover here in a minute, I am now confident in saying that when I have a full solve, all of these things that seem like, oh, that must be a clue, they all got to be in there. Like, I'm no longer thinking, oh, it's just a bunch of weird ways of phrasing things, but only like 2 things are actually clues. Okay. It just feels like the partial solve I've got right now just ties in like 6 of the things. And it just feels like they're all going to end up in there. I've got growing confidence in that.
Okay. Yeah. The only thing I could think of was like, if you look at the picture, maybe it's in some sort of canyon. It's in, there's a river going through it. Like clapping would sound really good. But that doesn't tell me anything about why they winked at him knowingly, unless this treasure solved spot has something to do with there's an echo. There's a spot where you can yell and there's a really good echo, for example, might be something that we would look into. So
I'm looking into a lot of. Go ahead, Bryn.
I think it's going to tie into like keeping rhythm of music.
Okay.
Rhythm and time, being good at keeping a beat.
I think so too. I was just going to say
somehow the frogs croaking is acknowledging like the sound, and then the frogs are going to be musically inclined. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say with the path that I'm heading down tonight, that I'm growing increasingly convinced of, I think it's going to end up being a music and percussion type thing.
Such as
that's referencing
John Coltrane, which I also have not figured out why that's in there.
Ooh, you're in for a treat.
Okay. John Coltrane is a famous musician.
Yes.
Jazz musician. And that was mentioned at the beginning of the augmented reality road trip. I'll just read the quote. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. It seemed appropriate.
Yep.
All right. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that, but it doesn't have to be quite yet if you're not ready.
Yeah, I think it'll just fit best in the kind of the flow of the podcast if we just cover it at the end.
Okay. I've got one more, but I think I went last. So, Bryn, you have any more?
I was just gonna talk about the clapping.
Okay. That didn't fit into your hand theme though.
I did not bring up hand themes in my head.
Trademark.
Now I'm embarrassed.
Okay, so
I'll just rattle off my last couple here.
Yeah.
So let's see. I've got a note just kind of memorializing the idea that within the text, he moved from like open sun to shade, then to rock/water. The Pokemon also kind of follow that same trajectory as he with like types as he's going along that path. So I think that that's very likely what we're looking for in the solve is something where you're starting kind of open, sunny, get into shade, then find some rock and water, and it's around that area, probably in a rocky area with the golem. Let's see here. I've got. Oh, he showed them the Pokemon card. He showed the Greninja and the Froggy, I believe, and it says that they examined it closely. That kind of jumped out to me a little bit. Like maybe there's something on one of those Pokemon cards that's could be important.
That's a good point. I like that.
Let's see. I think he mentioned real life, a couple of real life creatures within the augmented reality trip that it's kind of strange to go from like 15 Pokemon to then just, I'm also going to mention, I think it was eagles and minnows.
And raccoons.
And raccoons. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that just seems strange to me. It's like, it seems like he did the real creatures and animals in his opening and then made his augmented one. So why are now they're just random tricklings in of real life creatures? I thought that was just kind of a strange decision. The photos, the whole not remembering taking the photo and specifically saying that the photo was overexposed and that the other photos he had taken got ruined. I can't remember how he said, but they got ruined. A lot to look into there with photography and whatnot. Due to taking the pictures in an expanded reality. That's it. I keep holding it augmented as expanded reality.
So just can I comment on that actually?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the connection I made to that was there is in the big picture, the last picture, the overexposed picture, there is like a Mewtwo, right?
Yep.
And that's a psionic Pokemon or a psychic Pokemon, right?
Yes.
And because that creature is in this picture, would that account for the expanded reality? Because he's doing like a psychic attack. Or the Mewtwo was the one that ruined all the other pictures potentially.
Yeah, and then overexposed the one. I seem to remember him having like, like the laser stuff. I think I'm thinking back to like 20 years ago movies, but but yeah, I think that would be a perfectly reasonable explanation for that.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good call.
I have another one. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
All right. So I wanted to point out the end of the chapter. He's talking about, at the beginning of the augmented reality road trip, he's talking about it's high summer, middle of the day, right? It's really hot out. And then by the end of the day, it says the shadows in the late evening on the rocks, which is referencing the picture in the overexposed picture. But if we know that that was taken late in the day, that picture is what it says in the chapter, then if this picture does relate to somewhere in real life, or it's a rendition of somewhere in real life, we can actually figure out what the direction is based on where the shadows are on this picture, I believe. I have not done that yet, but I think it's fairly easy to figure out.
Cody's laughing at me because I also said the same thing, and that was my comment for this as well.
Your chapter photos, Nugget. Sorry, I might be skipping ahead too much.
No, that's good. That confirms that that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I was also thinking just what you said, that could help us narrow down an actual real life location.
And if this is the end of the trail or near where the treasure's hidden, then it possibly gives us some directionality that, if we find some trails on maps that we could figure out, does it line up with the endpoint or near the endpoint based on the direction that our body of water is and this cliff face looks like. Anyway, I think it might be useful. And because he said, high summer, it's giving us the season information we need to know. And because he says this picture is taken in late evening or late in the day, that also gives us the information we would know to be able to use the shadows. And I think he does mention shadows specifically. So I think that's a usable piece of information.
Yeah, and that's it's really interesting that you brought up that he specifically pointed out those two things, which are kind of like the two inputs you'd need to be able to figure that out. Because it's
Right.
definitely things that he could have easily skipped over. He wasn't trying to intentionally put those in there.
Right.
All right. You were right, Bryn.
Mm,
Two versus one. I was originally very skeptical of the idea.
I'm very much up on my high horse this episode. Thank you.
Yeah. The only other one I wanted to touch on my list here is the locals turn up from time to time line. I don't think we've touched on that yet. That one seems very important. I'm trying to remember the full
Yeah.
context. That was like where he eventually hit it near a place where locals turn up from time to time. I believe was kind of
Exactly.
the context.
Yep.
And I think that could very easily be a metaphorical line. So
Yes.
it could mean a whole lot of different things.
I mean, if it's in the context of this chapter, it just seems like it has to be a Pokemon. In my mind, I'm trying to figure it out as a Pokemon, another type of Pokemon in here that shows up. That would show up in this region. I'm not thinking of it as like people.
I'm not either. I think
Okay.
I think it's metaphorical. It could be something as simple as like, so in the video game Pokemon, you find Pokemon naturally anytime you're walking through tall grass. So, I mean, it could literally be hidden in a patch of tall grass, and that would be kind of where locals turn up from time to time. Because in the game, you get like I don't know, say like a 1 in 20 chance of each area of grass you're walking in for a Pokemon to spawn. I would call that locals Pokemon being turning up from time to time. So I don't know. There's one example of probably 100 different things that line could mean if
Yeah.
you're taking it metaphorically.
So, but that's another line you're hoping will solve itself once you get a little closer to the solution here.
That one to me kind of jumps out as possibly like a boots on the ground type line,
Okay.
especially where it is, like in the text, just like right at the end or as he's hiding it, I guess, and saying, I hit it near this. I think I don't think it's going to help you get to that general area, but maybe just the last little bit once your boots on the ground. And that's just a guess.
Okay.
I have a side quest happening right now that I
Okay.
don't know if you two have seen any chatter about on Discord. So he talks about the pictures on his phone were overexposed, terribly overexposed. So have you seen anybody like take this picture, scan it into the computer, and then like bring the exposure down as far as you can to see if that reveals anything like as you take all the exposure away? And I'm just doing it on my phone, but I can't like make it dramatic enough. And I also feel like I'd want to use a scanned image so I don't have any influence of like our overhead lights.
I haven't, but I'm full disclosure, I haven't been reading the Pokemon Discord chatter at all.
Seems like the easiest thing to do would be to buy that ebook and do it on that when you've got like the formal published image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah, I
think
don't
that's
know.
a good
I,
idea.
it does seem it's weird to talk about overexposed pictures with a phone versus film. Because typically you would think overexposed would be you're using actual film. So I don't know if that was supposed to be a nod towards editing the photo in a way to undo that action.
Mm-hmm. All right, Cody, you ready for your, or you still have more nuggets?
We were going to talk about chapter photos.
Okay.
It was supposed to be kind of our last section there, but I think we did touch on a lot of them.
That's my
Yeah,
fault.
yeah.
I'll take blame
All
for
right.
that. Yep.
Do you guys have anything else for chapter photos? Otherwise, I just have a couple things I could rattle off here.
Yeah, I guess I don't, but I guess I had a question for you, Cody, about the artist renditions of the Froakie and the Greninja that are in the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Did those stand out in any way to you? Like, those are not original renditions, they're artist renditions. So,
Well, I think I have to probably for just like copyright reasons, right?
okay, that makes sense.
That was my take, is that you probably just didn't have permission to use actual images of Pokemon. That was kind of my default take.
Okay.
The It does seem like the Froakie's specifically holding up three fingers in the photo. That's one of my notes I had here.
Okay.
And that's another thing I think I had seen referenced in the Discord that people were aware of, but it just kind of looked like he's going out of his way to hold up three fingers.
Okay.
With those pictures, the Greninja illustration has red eyes, like the Fabergé frog.
Hmm.
So just an additional connection between that theme.
Yeah, that's good.
I got another one here. I'm gonna talk about it as we're talking about photos because I guess it's kind of related to the Mewtwo purple image.
Yeah, do you want me to pull that up?
Yeah, sure. It's
Yeah,
not it's not going to be
this
helpful for what I'm
image-
going to say, but it'll be good for people to know because we didn't talk about it this episode. We talked about it in a previous episode.
All right, Cody,
Yeah,
take it away.
I haven't kept up with like what people have claimed to see in this picture online, but I know we all feel unanimous on the one aspect.
The Mewtwo.
Yeah, I think everyone's pretty unanimous on the Mewtwo. I've seen a lot of other takes and none of them that I buy, quite honestly.
Yeah, so kind
For
of
other hidden
the
Pokemon.
in the middle right here is where we're talking about there's a Mewtwo, and let me. So this is the full image of the quote-unquote overexposed image. I think this is one you provided to me, Cody, for the earlier box or chapter 3 discussion, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll show the zoomed in version. That definitely shows a Mewtwo-like creature there. Here. So you can kind of see the tail. The really weird thing is, and let me pull up one more version of this, that didn't quite make sense was, at least in the Mewtwo descriptions that I've read, the fingers are supposed to be kind of round, like balls, kind of.
Yeah.
And that Mewtwo to me looks like it's pointing at something, and it does not look like a rounded finger. But it's not the greatest resolution, so take that with a grain of salt. But here's another slightly.
Well, I also.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Slightly sharper version that's up on the screen right now.
I also chalked that up to him not wanting to veer too close to being realistic with the Pokemon just for like copyright reasons.
Interesting.
And it could be, I mean, that could even be why he included the photo of the Froakie and the Greninja to kind of let you know that, hey, I can't actually put Pokemon anywhere.
Right.
The pointing hand, the cute little Froakie too, is also kind of the hand that's not the 3. The other hand also seems like it's pointing in a direction.
Oh yeah, it looks like it's pointing behind him, so the previous page. All right, I gotta get the flashlight out after this. See what he's pointing to on the previous page. But yeah, that's just something I want to mention here too, is the pointing, and he's looking in a certain direction. Like, it's unclear what he'd be pointing to. Like, maybe if you find this location, then he's pointing to where the treasure is.
Yeah,
is my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that'd be kind of my first impression too. So the reason I wanted to bring up the photo is that it's the photo of Mewtwo. But I thought it was interesting because in the actual chapter, I think it'd be easy to think that he's specifically addressing Mewtwo when he says the original Pokemon Game Boy game had 150 different insect-inspired creatures, in addition to one extra Pokemon who was mysterious and very hard to find. Players obsessed with finding this extremely rare Pokemon helped generate much of the early popularity in the game, which I think a lot of people might think, oh, he's talking about Mewtwo, but he's not.
Really?
He's talking about Mew.
Oh.
Because he says 150 different Pokemon, and Mewtwo is the number 150. But he's talking the one additional extra. He's talking about Mew, not Mewtwo.
Really?
So that's my take on it, and I think a lot of people are thinking that photo and then that paragraph from the text are kind of going hand in hand, but I don't think though. I think there's a discrepancy there. The one thing I did see, where my notes go, is that Mew can transform into other Pokemon.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know that many other Pokemon can do that. I don't know off the top of my head, but the fact that Mew can transform, Mew seems to be called out in the text as like this one special Pokemon. And then we see kind of the Mewtwo-esque photo. I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it could be Mew transformed. Does that change anything? Not that I know of, but just kind of trying to tie in some of the Pokemon like abilities and kind of special characteristics.
And what was the part about like the Froakie leaves at some point, right? And comes back. And that's pretty mysterious. Like, why did it leave and come back? But I guess a Froakie couldn't convert into a Mewtwo. It'd have to be the other way around.
A Mew can become a Froakie.
So yeah, maybe it wasn't the Froakie that came back. It was this Mewtwo that came back.
Mew.
Oh, sorry. This
Don't
Mew
fall
that
into
came
the
back.
trap. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. It's just something to think about.
There's a reason why the Froakie left and came back that I can't figure out.
That's true. That's a good point.
He saw his friends, his Froakie friends. That's the explanation. I don't.
Why are there no Frogadiers?
Still weird.
Yeah, where are all the Frogadiers at?
Yeah. Again, I mean, the whole Mew being able to transform thing and the whole reference to Mew, not Mewtwo in the text, I don't know how it's helpful if it is, but I just wanted to kind of draw attention to it just in case. What else did I have? Oh, for photos, one other thing that I came across is, oh gosh, which one is it? The Pokemon game cases for Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon.
Okay.
There's each one of them has a Pokemon on the front, but if you put the two cases together, in the center is like another Pokemon that I think is like some special Pokemon. I probably should have a photo of it, but I don't. I just thought that was interesting because we're obviously trying to explore this one photo, and the fact that there's like precedent in the Pokemon games for kind of having two halves of a photo that you put together and then see a Pokemon. Seems like that could be related or a way to explore that purple photo that's provided in the text a little bit further. I haven't done it, but it's one of my takeaways seeing that's something that they had done on their game covers.
I like that. Okay. Yeah, it could be one of those weird foldy things. You make a picture by folding the page over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'd rather do that digitally.
Yeah.
One more thing that I forgot to mention, the part about the Mastiff. I can't remember the exact name of the dog-like Pokemon. But right at the beginning of the Augmented journey, he talks about a sound that sounded like a Mastiff. So what would that sound be if it's not a Mastiff? Because those are not here based on the sign. Something to think about.
So
it's a good question.
So he says,
is it fair to assume it's some sort of barking?
Yeah. It was at that moment I heard a loud noise. I could have sworn it sounded like a Mastiff, but the Froakie pointing to a sign said that was unlikely too, and we won't see any Bouffalant either, just so you know.
Yeah, and then he completely drops the issue of the loud noise.
What was that loud noise? Yeah. And maybe it's just
another pointing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Hand theme.
Pointing theme.
So anyway, that one stuck out to me as an unknown mystery. But then he talks about the raccoons too, of like misidentification. So it could just be that. But anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was just like a segue to start talking about what's not there, but it's a really good point you bring up, and I totally just read right over it that You should probably address what the loud noise was.
That might be important. Yeah.
I heard a loud noise, and here's everything it wasn't.
I googled the Mastiff sound, and there's some videos that like the first one that comes up with Pokemon cries, and it would play the sound. So I don't know. We can look
Okay.
into that afterwards, and
We'll listen
maybe
to
it
that.
makes a distinct sound that we're unaware of.
Cool.
An American eagle.
Okay. Cody, take it away.
Two other quick things. First, just other just things I caught as I was doing research didn't really fit into any of the segments we've talked about here.
Potpourri.
Any of our potpourri. Let's see here. Mewtwo. Forget it. Forget that. No, it's not that cool. All right, just one more. Just one more then. There's a move called Waterfall. It's a Gen 1 move. It was the signature move of Goldeen and Seaking, who I believe both Goldeen and Seaking were Pokemon referenced, weren't they?
No, it's Magikarp and Seaking.
There's no Goldeen?
No. I'm fairly confident there was no Goldeen.
All right. Well, there was a Seaking.
There was a Seaking, certainly, yes.
So anyway, it's a signature move of Goldeen and Seaking in Gen 1, and they were the only ones who could learn it. So not only was it a signature move, but a lot of the time, Pokemon can learn all sorts of different moves. So the fact that this one was locked to just them made me think, and there's a Seaking there. I think that could be a decent way of indicating that there's a waterfall nearby.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Good podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Lots to digest there. Come on, you can't leave me hanging like that.
All right. You haven't heard.
It's promised a big solve.
So what I think I've got is I've got the first half of a solve and like things to start following up on, and I feel pretty confident in it. And I'm normally pretty pessimistic about everything. So,
all right. If the podcast ends here, listeners, that means I agree, and we're going on boots on the ground.
Well, it's not even enough to get your boots on the ground. Okay, it's just like I feel like it's a good way of digesting a lot of the chapter and moving it towards a potential solution.
Okay, it's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah. So Blake, you haven't heard this yet. So after I do my whole spiel, I'm gonna get your take on it.
Okay.
And it's gonna be hilarious if after all this you're just like, no, that's bad.
I'm just gonna say, like last episode, actually that was just a typo.
All right. And I've got just a totally jumbled series of notes here, so I'm gonna try and walk through this as linearly as possible. So ultimately, the first half of the solve, which is all I've got, is half a solve, really focuses around two things. It focuses around Froakie, who I believe we can all agree was an instrumental part of the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And it focuses around John Coltrane, as referenced when he says, we listened to some John Coltrane, it seemed appropriate. So that's an obvious clue there. I will start with the Froakie. The Froakie is a starter Pokemon for a region called Kalos, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But Kalos is basically, there's different regions in the Pokemon universe, and Kalos is the one that's associated with Pokemon X and Y. So it's a big thing. And Froakie is the starter Pokemon for that region. So much in the way that you may know that like Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur were the first three starter Pokemon in Generation 1. Mm-hmm. So out of the 151 Pokemon, those are like, you got to pick one of those three to like start your whole adventure with. Mm-hmm. So Froakie being called out and being a starter Pokemon for a large region is pretty significant. So that's my first tie to the Kalos region.
Okay. My
additional ties to the Kalos region are occasionally, and not even very frequently, but occasionally there are there's real life places that Pokemon like draws inspiration from. So the Kalos region is known to be like associated or been drawn inspiration from France, where she says the French Quarter in the beginning of this chapter, which seemed like a pretty interesting thing to throw in. Like French Quarter seems like something you'd pull out of the text as a potential clue.
Now that you mention it, yes.
And the biggest city in Kalos is called Lumios, and that is directly tied to the Eiffel Tower. In the JCB text, you will note that he says he saw that 6-story hotel, and to him it may as well have been the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
So now I've got a pretty clear France tie, pretty clear Eiffel Tower tie, pretty clear starter Pokemon tie. So that's 3 different things that are in the chapter 2 text that are connecting Froakie to this region, Kalos, and kind of drawing your attention to Kalos. So that's where I'm at next, is Kalos. Now Kalos, let's see. So Kalos is kind of synonymous or inspired by France. Now, we talked in the chapter 3 episode about how in Pokemon Go, also obviously referenced in the chapter, the whole Pokemon Go thing, we talked about how occasionally, and again, this is somewhat rare, considering all the Pokemon, occasionally there are Pokemon that are like geo-locked to a certain area. And if you want to get that Pokemon in the wild in Pokemon Go, you literally have to go to that part of the world. So there's one Pokemon that is geo-locked to France. Can you guess what Pokemon that is, Blake?
Mr. Mime?
That was my guess too.
I'm gonna guess Froakie.
Awesome.
Or Greninja,
No,
maybe?
not Froakie. No. You're not gonna guess. I set you up for failure. You're not.
I'm so happy we both guessed Mr. Mime.
This is so funny that you guys both guessed Mr. Mime.
I don't know.
It's a Pokemon called Klefki.
Okay.
So Froakie, Kalos. Now we've got, because Kalos is France, the one Pokemon that's geolocked there is Klefki. So now we've got pretty strong ties to Klefki. Now Klefki is a Pokemon that is shaped like a key ring with keys on it.
I'm looking at it now, yeah.
Yeah. So interesting in that it's, so we'll say key.
Yep.
Key is one kind of theme there.
Yep.
It also, the word clef is French for, what was it, dear?
It was a music note, like a music note, right?
It wasn't music. I should have wrote that part down.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
I'm looking it up too.
Is it left?
Key. Okay, sorry. Clef is French for key. It's C-L-E-F.
C-L-E-F.
So clef.
Okay.
So he's called Klefki because A, he looks like a music clef, and B, because clef in French, which he's geolocked to France, also means key. So kind of the 2 themes that you get from this Pokemon that he specifically like drew ties to is music and key. Now we're going to jump over to the Jon Coltrane string over here.
Okay. I'm liking this so far.
Good. So Jon Coltrane, we'll start with the obvious one. This is something I got from Discord that I think a lot of people knew, but I'm expanding on it. And that is 3 separate times in the text, he talks specifically about this jar of flies they got for Froakie, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead and open up the photo I sent you called like Circle of Tones, Circle of Fifths. And this is a sketch by Jon Coltrane kind of describing some music theory and the Circle of Fifths and just some other general music theory stuff. But go ahead and tell me, Blake, what that looks like. The answer is a jar of flies.
Okay.
I said the Hopi calendar.
Oh, okay. So I see the overlaps around the edges look like fly wings.
Yes. And I could send you some other pictures too that clean it up a little bit more. And it's like, it looks like a jar of flies. Like because of all the other connections I've made here, I'm starting to buy into that's the jar of flies connection.
Interesting.
Because it says jar of flies 3 separate times and Jon Coltrane, and then Jon Coltrane had come up with this music theory image that I do think looks like a jar of flies.
And that was right at the beginning. They stopped at the pet store, bought the jar of flies, got on the road, and then they agreed that John Coltrane was a appropriate choice.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see here. What else have I got? John Coltrane had a wife whose name was Alice. Alice's Looking Glass. That's in there.
Yep.
And Alice Coltrane also moved to Paris for a time. So back to kind of your France connection here.
Okay.
So right now, that's when it kind of occurred to me. I got to those two different points, realized that the whole clef key string was leading to music. The whole John Coltrane thing is in music. Oh, and then the John Coltrane thing, he's really known for, he's a jazz musician, and he is known for, was it Big Steps?
Okay.
Basically, he's known a lot for key changes.
Okay.
So that's when it occurred to me that this clef key hint and the key thing might not be a physical key, but might be musical keys. Boom. That's when I got kind of excited here, because now I've got my clef key that's music and keys, and then my Coltrane string of thought over here that's basically leading to this music theory thing that's describing circle of fifths, but also associated with keys. And so now I'm like, all right, I'm at music keys. And I like that the output of music keys, you got your like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So there's some letters you can work with. And then also a lot of times it's described with Roman numerals. So I think there's some different outputs that I can get to, focusing on specifically probably John or Alice Coltrane and keys and key changes, that's going to possibly give me some output that's like useful.
Okay.
And all of this, because I know I've come up with a lot of ideas that pull information from chapter or part 1 of the book. This is all just using the part 2 stuff, and pulls in the John Coltrane seems appropriate, the jar of flies, the Alice's Looking Glass, the French Quarter, the Eiffel Tower, the whole Pokemon Go thing, Frokie in general, John Coltrane. I mean, I feel like it just pulls in a lot of the stuff into moving me towards music keys, and that's where I am now. So I'm going to say that's the end of my starting theory, and that's what I'm moving off. That's what I'm working on now.
Okay.
So I'll say that's my formal end, and now we'll talk about some stuff I found in the last like half hour before starting the podcast that I'm less eager to like put my stamp of approval on.
Okay.
And that is, I think the only thing is that Alice Coltrane I found had an album, that she recorded, and there was a track called Charanam, which is a Sanskrit word, and we've obviously talked about some Sanskrit stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a Sanskrit word that means, again, I was just looking at it. You might like this part though, because we just talked about it. Okay, so it's a word in music that means foot and refers to the final section of a composition. Do you recognize that from anywhere?
No.
My theory from last episode about Joy's Serenade referencing each of the first 4 stanzas, referencing like being clues for each of the first 4 boxes,
right.
Which means that the second box would be the Pokemon box. And the second box is the one that says, although the coda is incomplete, there's a flurry or a flutter of chatter all around.
Flutter of excitement around, yeah.
Although the coda is incomplete. So coda is the concluding passage of a piece or movement of music. And then now we have this Alice Coltrane song in Sanskrit, which we know is something relevant. And the title of the song in Sanskrit means the final section of the composition. So I think that, again, is when I'm not putting my stamp of approval on yet. And that one does pull from outside of part 2 with the Joyous Serenade.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting because it would be in line with my theory from last episode. and obviously a couple other potential ties there. But that's what I'm kind of actively working on still. What do you think?
Okay. No, I like it a lot. So obviously the clapping maybe fits
Feverishly
into
clapping.
maybe fits into the music theme, but so you think it's somewhere we have to figure out more of a music cipher or something in this chapter, or what are your...
I think it's going to be where I'm looking right now is John Coltrane was known for the Coltrane, what's it called? The Coltrane something. Basically, like an absurd amount of key changes that you would not normally see. So I kept being drawn to the word key and like music. So music keys. So I think like my obvious first spot that I'm starting to look now is I'm trying to find like John Coltrane compositions that change keys like crazy.
Okay.
And somehow get probably letters, maybe Roman numerals from that mean something. So for example, you can work with A, B, C, D, E, F, G for the different keys. So let's say I looked at like state abbreviations, and there's 3 state abbreviations that use just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's like California and Delaware, which are outside of the zone, but then Georgia. So say you've got like, I guess my first thing that I'm looking for potentially is like a section of music that is somehow tied to one of these other clues that maybe has like 5 key changes, and it's like the first 3 would be like an abbreviation for a city, and then the second 2 would be GA for Georgia.
Right.
So yeah, like ABCGA, and that leads to a city in Georgia.
Okay.
You're smirking.
I don't know. That's I could buy into it. You've done a great job leading us to this point. And then and you're thinking of music keys and not other types of keys, because if we're looking at, what is it, clef key?
Because of clef key, and because
clef key, it has keys, looks like a keychain, but also has a musical note. That's what's pushing you in the direction of music.
Well, and then John Coltrane in general, and the Coltrane changes, I think, is what I was specifically. The Coltrane changes, and then the relation to his whole music theory diagram that relates to Jar of Flies.
Jar of Flies.
Because the Coltrane changes is one of the things that he's like really well known for. And it's the harmonic progression thing and a bunch of key changes.
So yeah, I just want to pull that up. I mean, is there something we can use here? Like, what's the patterning here? It's basically showing his patterns of key changes that are appropriate, that sound good, maybe, or
it would be a long explanation, and I'm not qualified to give it. But it's music theory stuff. Generally, it's what sounds good with what.
You don't think we can use this to decrypt a cipher somewhere?
My takeaway, I think you just love ciphers. You're always looking for ciphers. My takeaway is that this is the Jar of Flies connection, and it's to just draw your attention to some basic music theory stuff that I think is where you're going to find your next clue. That's my take on it.
Okay, I will come at the Pokemon box with a different eye then and look for, but I guess the fear
my mind is blown that Blake's not more convinced of this.
There's so many ties.
Let me just say, I think that the point you got to that stamped Cody of approval is great. Like, I agree with all of that.
You just have a different idea on where to go next.
I'm just already trying to get to the next step, and maybe I'm being a little eager, but where do you take that information? And I guess my concern is you're going more outside of the book, right? To get more clues from Alice Coltrane. And it says Alice, so maybe that's fair.
Well, the next step is, at least that we were looking to in the 20 minutes that we had, was try to find, like, is there a song name between one or two of them that has a tie to the book? Like, we just need to, I think, start by looking into, like, some song titles. I know John Coltrane did a very famous tour in Japan like a year before he died.
Hmm.
So I think we need to be looking into like those performances in Japan. Yeah, so I think we just need to look into more him and Alice more as artists and see what connections we can then draw
Okay.
back.
Okay. No, I'm all in. I'm just excited to get to the next step. Sorry. That's an amazing amount of work and connections that you made there, Cody.
I think it connects a lot of things and kind of points us in the direction.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And less metaphorical, I think. More just like concrete ties to things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to me, all those things seem like undeniable connections. Even like the jar of flies, I think that just, I don't know. I guess I'm like, how could that not be it? It just seems all too perfect for how it comes together.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree that seems to make a lot of sense to me. I love the Pokemon Go one with the geolock or geolocation, geolocks with the French Quarter, with the Eiffel Tower, like, and it links to a key.
Yeah,
that's musical, and John Coltrane. Yeah, it all seems to come together to me. I like.
Yeah, it's the thing I love to talk about is like if I wanted to get someone to this point, looking at these things, what clues would I put in the chapter? And I feel like this would probably be it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we also, I think, talking through this chapter made it clear that we need to go back and like identify all the sounds that are referenced in this chapter and kind of see how these particular sounds can be tying in. Obviously, there's more layers, but it just seems like a very strong introduction to the steps that we need to be taking next and what to continue to refine.
Yeah. And I just really want to point out specifically, and I don't know all the technical musical jargon for it, but just like how specifically John Coltrane was known for his special use or bouncing between musical keys more than just most other musicians. It's not like, oh, all musicians do this. Like, so the key thing with John Coltrane and then the key thing with the Pokemon, that's what really it was also nice because I didn't know what I was going to find there. So it wasn't confirmation bias. It was like, oh my gosh, this fits perfectly. So anyway, I'll be interested to see what other people think about that theory.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's good.
And I think that it could, what I'm really excited for is I think it could like knock some cobwebs out with some people who have some other knowledge about things.
Yeah.
To like give them a good jumping off point to be like, oh, I know exactly what to do next after starting with this.
Okay.
So exciting times.
This is the breakthrough the Pokemon box needed.
It has seemed like a stagnant box.
It is okay.
From what I've seen, it's been super stagnant. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, even I guess I don't know anything about music, but this gets me excited about it to pursue it, and see how far we can take this because it does seem like a big step in the right direction. Like Cody and I were talking, we don't know if this is it. Like, is this 10% of the solve? Is this getting us 30% of the way to where we need to be?
Right.
But it does seem like it pulls in a lot of things. And like Cody said before, we obviously need to connect all the dots of these things that are referenced. But it does seem like it connects a lot of the dots. So I don't know. I guess I would feel like this could be potentially be like a fifth of it, a quarter of it.
Yeah. Where do we get, what do we do with all the Pokemon that were listed in the augmented reality then, I guess?
I mean, I think it helps identify what you're going to be seeing along the route as you're, like, if we're looking at a trail, I think it's going to help identify the stages of the trail as you're getting through it.
Yeah.
And just what region you're in. They're in like a swampy type region with a lot of bugs, and then you're going to end up finding it near water and rocks. I mean, if I think there are certain things that need to be included when he like reveals what the actual solve was for it to feel satisfying, like we had talked about. They clapped and they winked at me knowingly. I think that's one that needs to be in there. I think if at the end of the day the Pokemon were just there to like create a narrative and at the same time, paint a picture of the area you're going to be in and the final area is going to be hidden. And there's other good reasons for it to be there. I think that would be satisfying enough.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't feel like, oh, why did you name all these Pokemon then?
Okay.
And then just to touch on this real quick, it just occurred to me because I don't think we've talked about it in the podcast, although I'm sure that the vast majority of people already know this, but Jon Collins-Black has a strong musical background.
Right.
So he would also have this kind of stuff on his mind and be well equipped to come up with some sort of puzzle that's related to music theory type stuff.
Yeah, we've talked about in the previous chapters. We've been looking for it for a while now, and then maybe this is the magnum opus for Jon Collins-Black's music application for this puzzle book. Seems like it's going that direction.
Definitely.
All right, that is a podcast, folks. Thanks for taking this journey with us, and super thanks to Cody for providing some really good content for the community, in my opinion.
I hope so. Hopefully it pans out.
Yep. Remain steady.
I can't. I don't see how it can't be the right step to be taking.
Bryn's the ultimate hype man.
I told him we're booking tickets.
Well, that's what I heard.
Nowhere.
That's what I heard, but yeah, we don't know where. You haven't told me a place yet, so that's why I guess I had hesitation. Sorry, you overhyped it a little too much.
I knew she would.
I mean, I would not say I overhyped. I think in this treasure hunt, I mean, you go around in circles so many times. I mean, 99% of the time we're just spinning in circles, not making actual progress. And this feels like real tangible progress in the right direction. So I would argue that is worth celebrating.
100%. And I'm going to be hyping up my trouble board solve again next episode probably. So, and that's like 10% of what Cody put together, maybe 20% of what Cody put together. So anyway, I think you should be super proud of that connection that you made. And it feels good to have something you feel like you can
like make a little bit of progress,
have something solid, right? Instead of speculative. So
yeah,
it seems like you're on that track. That's great.
And it all came together today. So I'm excited to sleep on it and see if I think of some other ways to progress forward now that I've got that foundation of pointing me in the right direction, hopefully. And if anyone has any ideas to help refine the theory, write them into tips.unofficialpodcast.
No.
Dang it.
Tips.
Someone else do it.
tips.ttiunofficialpodcast@gmail.com. The link you can copy and paste is down below, however you're consuming this content. So it's a hard one to type out, admittedly.
It's a puzzle in itself.
Yeah. If you can send us an email, you're probably a good treasure hunter. All right. Let us wrap it up. It's going, we're getting long in the tooth here. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And yeah, we're open to all comments on this, especially the last part of this. If you think that's legit, or if you have the next step for us, we'd love to hear that. Have a good night.
Searching for clues.